Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Laura Ingraham. Tonight we'll explore the assault allegations against Hollywood comedian Louis C.K. and Alabama senatorial candidate Roy Moore. And that's where we begin tonight's angle. The media and political world are apoplectic over allegations of sexual misconduct against Roy Moore. 3 women allege that he had relationships with them when they were teenagers, and Moore was in his early 30s. One woman, who was 14 at the time, says he initiated a sexual encounter. GOP establishment figures and the left are calling on Moore to withdraw from the race. But Moore has flatly denied the allegations, and he's vowing to fight on. Establishment media figures are salivating over the scandal.
This is Todd Aiken times 5. This is much worse.
If I am running Democratic candidates, I am plastering the party. This is the party of pedophiles. This is the party of physical abusers. So you make him one of the poster boys.
Wait a second. The GOP is a party of abusers? I don't think they want to go there. I've got 2 words for you. Bill Clinton. Now, it was reported this week that another sexual degenerate, Harvey Weinstein, employed a private eye named Jack Palladino, and he was hired to collect dirt on his accusers. And by the way, you know who Palladino used to work for doing that same job? Bill Clinton. You got it. And then there's David Boies, the Democratic super lawyer who represented Al Gore and gave millions to the Clintons and to the Obamas, and was also employed by Weinstein. He, too, helped suppress stories of Harvey's misdeeds using what the New Yorker called a network of spies. And I haven't even gotten into the rape allegations against Bill Clinton. Of course, in the sex scandals involving Weiner, Spitzer, Barney Frank, need I go on? And the GOP is the party of sexual abuse? Get out of here. Last time I checked, Weinstein, Spacey, and Louis C.K. weren't exactly hanging out at CPAC. You see the left shield and protect their own to the very end. Oh, and by the way, Democrat Senator Bob Menendez is currently in the middle of a federal trial for bribery. And right now, no one, and I mean no one on the left, is calling for him to resign. By the way, when Chuck Schumer was asked about this recently, he just kind of refused to answer. He kind of moved on to the next question. And who can forget that after impeachment, remember that impeachment vote of Bill Clinton, the Democrats raced up to Capitol Hill right after the vote, and they held what was the equivalent of a White House pep rally for Bill Clinton. But the only thing they didn't have was balloons for that thing. And meanwhile, Republicans, they throw their candidates overboard the moment an allegation is made, even if it's 38 years old. Regarding Roy Moore, as I stated last night, he was not the candidate I supported in this race. I supported Mo Brooks. So my commentary doesn't come from a place of advocacy, but rather I want to lay out the facts as we have them. This is Moore himself answering the charges from our own Sean Hannity today on the radio.
These allegations are completely false and misleading. I don't know Ms. Corpman from anybody. I've never talked to her, never had any contact with her. You understand this is 40 years ago. And after my return from the military, I dated a lot of young ladies. I don't remember ever dating any girl without the permission of her mother.
Do you remember dating girls that young at that time?
Not generally, no. If I did, I'm not going to dispute anything, but I don't remember anything like that.
Let me go back to Corfman for a minute here, because this is the issue here. She gives specific instances.
It never happened, and I don't even like hearing it because it never happened, and they're doing this a month away, 4 weeks away, after 40 years in public service. I've run 5 successful campaigns, statewide campaigns, 3 in the county. This has never been brought up. If you abuse a 14-year-old, you shouldn't be a Senate candidate. I agree with that, but I did not do that.
And you can say unequivocally you never dated anybody that was in their late teens like that when you were 32?
It would have been out of my customary behavior. That's right.
In other words, you don't recall ever dating any girl that young when you were that old?
I've said no.
And you think that's inappropriate, too? That's what you're saying?
Inappropriate, yes.
Now, he did deny it, but some of the answers were a little awkward, particularly that one about asking mothers' permission to date their daughters. And honestly, look, we don't know what went on almost 40 years ago, and there's no way to prove or disprove what these women allege. These are seedy and really horrible charges, and they're very, very troubling. But this is now a political question. It's not a legal question. Should Moore remain in the race? And would Alabama voters still support him? I asked my Alabama listeners on radio that very question today, and here's what they said.
I'm definitely still voting for Roy Moore, and it's a hit piece. Roy Moore will win by an even larger margin now. Being attacked by the Washington Post is the equivalent of being endorsed by Donald Trump.
We would rather vote for a man that has allegations against him that certainly come from a dubious source.
We're not stupid. We see what's going on. We see this. They did the same thing to Donald Trump 30 days before the election.
We had a board full of calls, the entire show on this topic, because we have a lot of listeners in Alabama. And I was really struck that not one caller said they would drop Moore. They wouldn't show up and vote for him. Not one. The timing of these allegations just weeks before the election is a little suspicious, to say the least. And the fact that the Washington Post, whose editorial board opposes Moore's candidacy and then some, is the source, and it's the source of the bombshell, should give us some pause. And that's the angle. Should Moore stay or should Moore go? And what about the timing and the source of these allegations? To discuss this from Montgomery, Alabama, I'm joined by Terry Butts. He's a retired Alabama Supreme Court justice who once represented Roy Moore. And from Boston, Brian Maloney, the co-founder of MediaEqualizer.com. Mr. Butts, let's start with you. You once represented Judge Moore. You served on the Alabama Supreme Court. Are there any circumstances, given what you know now, that would lead you to advise him to step aside?
You have to understand that I do know Judge Moore, and along with a former U.S. attorney named Jim Wilson and another lawyer named Mike Jones from Laverne, we represented Judge Moore during his first ethics trial during the time he was removed from the Alabama Supreme Court over the Ten Commandments issue. So we got to know Judge Moore very well at that time. And to specifically answer your question, you have to understand the people of Alabama are suspicious of anything that comes, what they think comes out of Washington, D.C. They're suspicious of Washington to begin with. And that's not to take anything away from these allegation that is serious, which it is. And if a girl is a victim of any kind of sexual abuse, when I was a trial judge, I had a reputation of coming down very hard on child abusers. But people of Alabama will probably stand by Judge Moore, and he will be elected. And that is what is likely to happen in this instance, because they are not sure on the timing of this and whether or not it's a political hit piece. And that's one of the things that people are saying. And they don't look at it as necessarily as a moral issue as such necessarily, but whether or not it's just more politics or more of the same.
Brian, I want to jump in with you on the media aspect of this and some of the substance as well. The media have such a case of aggressive amnesia. We had Juanita Broderick make a rape allegation against Bill Clinton, and it was difficult to find mainstream media outlets that would do much of anything with that. Yeah, they reported it initially in the New York Times. NBC ran a report. Lisa Myers actually pursued that. But it went away, and it was a rape allegation. This is rape. And so for these people to come on television this morning and say, oh, this just shows you, this is the party of abuse, this is the party of sexual abuse, get out of here. I mean, I listed the names of the Democrats who've had their own sexual problems, and most of them are not encouraged to resign, step aside, and often they don't even get a reprimand.
Well, that's absolutely right, Laura. And, you know, I am just fired up over the media arrogance going on right here. The Northeastern media And the Washington Post, they're not trying to be journalists here. They have become the story. They are creating the news. And how you know this is in the timing. I used to work in political campaigns, and I know how to time a hit piece on your opponent. And that is exactly when you do so. But here you have a political figure who's been well known in that state for decades. Where was this in a bruising primary battle where tens of millions of dollars were spent? How come none of this came about? And then a Washington Post reporter waltzes into the state and suddenly gets the scoop of the decade in that state and has this magical story unfold. Now, to me, at this point, it's not even so much about whether it's guilt or innocence, because we weren't there and it was almost 40 years ago. But what it is about is a fundamental misunderstanding by the Northeastern media that it is ultimately the people of Alabama that will decide this race. They are the ones voting, not anyone in Washington, and I don't think they can get past that in D.C.
And Mr. Butt says, I have a daughter who's 12 years old, and I think of I think of that scene described, and I want to throw up. Or, I mean, it's so gross, and I had to turn the TV off. My kids, we were watching dinner tonight. I couldn't even have them watch the news again. So that part of it is just, it steams me. It's infuriating. At the same time, it is hard to ever disprove something like this. If a man or a woman is accused of something decades and decades later, how do you ever, you can't really ever respond. You can't really get your reputation back. I mean, if it's not true, the man's reputation will never be the same. If it is true, yeah, he shouldn't be running. But the people of Alabama now have all this pressure on them because people like Jonah Goldberg, columnist, and Mike Lee of Utah, they say he should step aside because this is going to hurt the party. Every Senate candidate running is now going to be asked the Roy Moore question.
Well, that is a fact, Ms. Ingraham. And one other thing, too, that is playing out in the state of Alabama, in addition to the Roy Moore thing, is how is this going to affect the state politics in Alabama? Is it going to bleed over into our 2018 election cycle for all of our state races, legislative and governor and others? Because what people don't realize here is, if I understand the United States Senate rules, even if Roy Moore is elected in December, the United States Senate can refuse to seat him, if that is correct. And I'm no expert on the United States Senate rules. But what happens if the United States Senate says, okay, you've elected the man, but we are not going to seat him because we don't think we can. Now then, we have a real mess in Alabama, and now we really do have a legal morass, and it just continues on, and that bleeds over and hurts the Republican Party in the state of Alabama.
Yeah,
so you got to ask yourself what's going on.
Yeah, it's just what the Republican Party needs right now. I mean, they got tax reform, they botched Obamacare, and now this, and so I think that's why so many of my callers, they are like their antenna went up about this, and I think a lot of them weren't even necessarily Roy Moore supporters. And some of I supported Mo Brooks. I was a Mo Brooks person. Thank you both for joining us, Mr. Butts and Brian Maloney. And joining us now from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, on where this election goes from here is John Merrill. He's the current Secretary of State from Alabama. Mr. Merrill, we've heard a lot in the last 24 hours about state process, the state process when something like this happens. It is true, is it not, that even if he steps aside, which he says he will not do, his name, Roy Moore's name, remains on this ballot.
That's right, Laura. Even if Judge Moore decides that he wants to disqualify himself and not continue his campaign, at that point it will not matter. His name will still be on the ballot. Even if the Republican Party decided that they would not formally continue with their support of Judge Moore as their nominee, as it was confirmed to our office on October the 11th, Judge Moore's name will remain on the ballot for the 2012, for the December 12th 2017 special general election.
And I understand that the governor today has entertained the idea of moving the election, but it was said that that would only take place if the White House gave its imprimatur to that move. Is that correct? Is that report correct?
Well, a number of those issues remain to be explored because our code is very clear about certain issues that need to be addressed when it comes to those actual actions that will occur. That is one that is still up in the air, but one that is certainly being explored.
Well, if in fact he does not step aside and there is a massive, like, Lisa Murkowski-style write-in campaign for, let's say, I don't know, Jeff Sessions or Mo Brooks. Jeff Sessions is the Attorney General, but maybe he goes back to be Senator. I'm just speculating. Or someone like a Mo Brooks. You'd have to be a name that everybody can remember, because you have to spell the name correctly. You can't have any mistake in the name, or the ballot is invalid. So if that write-in campaign happens, it would have to be overwhelming in order to swamp the Democrat, Mr. Jones. Correct? And that would likely not happen.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it, because only 2 candidates appear on the ballot today, and those candidates are Judge Roy Moore and Doug Jones, who's a former federal prosecutor. And if a write-in effort takes place, then that write-in campaign and that educational process associated with that campaign is going to take a great deal of time, energy, and effort in order to educate our people on what they need to do about casting their ballot for someone that's not currently on the ballot.
And that's why you would need more time in order to get that word out, correct? That's why the election could be moved if indeed that ends up being the decision of the state party, which we haven't heard a lot from.
Well,
what is the state party saying here today?
Well, I think there are a number of conversations that are ongoing, but of course the state party's in a very difficult position as well, as they try to determine what their intentions are and where they need to go. And I know that those conversations will continue to take place over the next few days, maybe even a week or so, depending on what other information is introduced next week as this saga continues.
Do you know Mr. Moore, Judge Moore?
I do know Judge Moore. Yes, ma'am. I've known
What do you
him
think
for
about
some
these
time.
allegations?
Well, I'm very surprised that this information has just been introduced. I think that's the most interesting part of it to me. I think it's odd that these revelations have just been introduced, considering the fact Judge Moore has stood for election 8 times in our state for different offices. He's been a public figure for more than 30 years in the state of Alabama. And it's very difficult for a lot of people in our state to believe that because of his history and because of the controversy that has surrounded Judge Moore and his public service, that this type of information is only now being introduced by someone. Of course, these charges are very, very serious, and they need to be given the full measure of vetting that would be necessary to determine their validity. And I think that most of our people are still convinced that in order for someone to be removed from the ballot, or to even remove themselves, or to have the state party consider
He can't be removed from the ballot. That's the thing, and that's why the timing of this is interesting. He cannot be removed from the ballot.
But to disqualify, to disqualify themselves from consideration for people not to vote for them, because those names cannot be removed. We're within the 76-day window.
One more scenario, not to play like hypothetical here, but one more scenario. Let's say he does separate himself, or the Republican Party of the state separates itself from Judge Moore, and he also bows out. He still wins. Let's say he still has the most votes. That election is then null and void, correct? And the election results then go to the Democrat, correct?
No.
Oh, it doesn't go to anybody.
Judge Moore disqualifies? That is correct. If Judge Moore disqualifies himself, or if the state party rescinds their nomination and their endorsement of him, and if those activities occur formally, that means we receive information in the Office of the Secretary of State that would indicate that that is indeed the case, then at that point our election would be null and void, and we would have to hold a new election, and Senator Strange would continue to serve in that seat as the temporary appointment until another senator was duly elected and sworn in according to the Constitution.
That would be quite something. Oh, we really appreciate this. This is a complicated process. We appreciate it so much. Thank you. And coming up, a stunning and revolting admission from comedian Louis C.K. and the cultural fallout. We'll be right back with the details. Last night we told you about the stunning allegations of sexual misconduct by comedian Louis C.K. Well, now we can call those accusations facts after he released a statement admitting his misdeeds. Here's what he said. these stories are true. At the time, I said to myself that what I did was okay because I never showed a woman my without asking first, which is also true. But what I learned later in life, too late, is that when you have power over another person, asking them to look at your isn't a question. It's a predicament for them. The power I had over these women is that they admired me. Close quote. It's unbelievable. It's still unbelievable. Louis C.K. went on to say he regretted that he hurt so many people and that he, quote, will now step back and take a long time to listen. Well, let's not forget that last year, Louis C.K. denied the then rumors to the entertainment website Vulture, saying, quote, I don't care about that. That's nothing to me. That's not real. And late-night comedians, who are always quick to pounce anytime a conservative is accused of anything, had far more muted reactions to Louis C.K. Check out Jimmy Kimmel. He didn't even mention it. And here's how C.K.'s former writing buddy, Stephen Colbert, addressed the revelations.
Louis canceled his appearance here tonight because the New York Times broke this story today. 5 women are accusing Louis C.K. of sexual misconduct. When reached for comment, Jesus said, I don't want to hear about it. I was a big fan.
It's so not funny. It's just... Joining us now for reaction from New York is stand-up comedian Jimmy Fallon, and from here in Washington to pick up with our conversation from last night, broadcaster and New York Times bestselling author Raymond Arroyo. Jimmy, let's start with you. The comedians are they're a little quiet about Louis C.K., aren't they? The condemnations for conservatives come fast and furious, but this time the cat has their tongue.
Yeah, it's so funny. I mean, who would have thought we spent the entire award season with Hollywood lecturing us about Donald Trump's character? It turns out these people really can act, because give me a break with this. Louis C.K., I want to say this. First and foremost, as a comic that's based here in New York City, everybody in the city knew this story, including a guy like Colbert, including a guy like Jimmy Kimmel. Now, in Kimmel's defense, he's not speaking out because he hasn't gotten his talking points from Chuck Schumer yet. But I'm sure he'll have something to say once, once Chucky gives him a direction, he'll know what to do like he did with health care. But everybody knew this story. And what I'm hoping we can get out of this as a nation, is I'm hoping once and for all, everybody can come to understand just how full of it Hollywood is when they try to purport to care about stuff like this. It's all a branding exercise for them. Everybody knew he did this, but they thought it would be damaging to their brand to out them.
Now they protected him. They protected him. They protected Weinstein. They protected him, just like the Democrats protected Clinton and Weiner and Spitzer and what they're doing to Menendez in a different way, different context.
Of course. I mean, if Louis C.K. was smart, he would change his name to Bob Menendez, and the media would leave him alone.
Let's talk to Raymond Arroyo here. Raymond, he lost a bunch of deals, I know, C.K. or Louis, whatever we're calling, a lot of deals. And he had a movie that was coming out, which you pointed out on radio today, really does tell the story of the man.
Well, look, he lost the deal with FX. He had an animated special. He had several sitcoms in development. By the way, his production company was named Pig Newton, so kind of a giveaway.
That kind of works.
But the movie, Daddy, I Love You, concerns the 17-year-old daughter of a writer played by Louis C.K. who falls in love with a 68-year-old director. That's the plot.
Let's watch a clip from this sick, twisted film.
You're with Leslie Goodwin?
Isn't that weird?
No, it's not that weird. He likes young girls.
Yes, he does.
China. She is a child. She knows nothing. She's like a Disney princess on estrogen.
She could do a lot worse.
It's my daughter.
China is a minor. A minor what?
I mean, everybody's a pervert. I'm a pervert. We're all perverts. Who cares?
Everybody's a pervert. It's normalizing. So Raymond, at the end, he actually supports the relationship.
There's a feverino and a plea for statutory rape. I mean, the problem with Louis C.K. is this. He created product, wrapped aberrant behavior, self-abuse, and abuse of others in a joke, and people continued to listen. My problem is not the nasty jokes. It's that kids, young people, and pervs were exposed to it and think this is normal behavior.
Jimmy, the perv degenerate aspect of all of this, is there for anyone to see in the work product of his quote comedy.
Yes.
I mean, so Malkovich is kind of leering at the 17-year-old, like, oh, this is a real relation. This is great. Isn't this fun? And in the end, it's all, wow, this is so normal. Why is anyone surprised? His apology was weird with the D word used in it twice.
Oh, yeah, I mean, yeah, and kudos to you for getting through that. I wasn't sure how you were going to execute that.
I wasn't going to. Jimmy, I wanted you to go. No, Jimmy, I wanted you to read that, okay, with some kind of dramatic flourish. Why do I have to read these full screens?
I was thinking, Laura, all I was thinking as you were reading that intro is, man, what does it say about me that they brought me on for this specific story? Like, hey, we've got this creep fondling himself. You know who knows a lot about that sort of thing? Jimmy Fallon. Let's get him in here.
Jimmy, now I feel dirty all over.
No, I want to play one more thing. Jon Stewart was asked about this. I guess it was last year because, as you said, Jimmy, everybody knew about this.
Yeah.
Let's watch how he reacted.
Yep.
All I can tell you is I've worked with Louis for 30 years, and, like, he's a wonderful man and person, and I've never heard anything about this. And we've all known Bill Cosby was a prick for a long time. So I don't know what to tell you. But I didn't know about the sexual assault.
Stop it.
Jimmy, do you think that's truthful? I mean,
no, he is a total fraud. They all knew him really well. He and Colbert worked together going back to '96 on the Dana Carvey show, and he has written for Conan. They've been involved with each other for about 30 years. Everybody, I mean, think about this. I'm a comedian who works at Fox News. So if I knew about this, do you know how many people it had to travel through in liberal Hollywood to make it all the way back to me? This is like a good football play making its way to the Cleveland Browns locker room. It's not supposed to happen. It doesn't often happen, but it did. You know, he's not totally full of it.
Does this mean comedy cleans itself up at all, or the depravity continues?
One would hope the message is that the content needs cleaning up, not just the people. Marshall McLuhan had a great line. We make our tools, and later our tools make us. Let's hope it's not in this image.
All right, guys, thanks so much. And up ahead, from Donna Brazil's revelations of corruption to the Roy Moore accusations, man, it's been a wild week. And we haven't even talked to Asia for the Republican Party and Democrat Party. Where do we go from here? Stay tuned. Thanks for staying with us. It's been a wild roller coaster week in the world of politics. Donna Brazil dropped bombshell after bombshell about running the Democratic Party during Hillary Clinton's doomed presidential campaign. And, of course, Alabama's Republican Senate nominee, Roy Moore, now facing late-in-the-game accusations that he initiated a sexual encounter with an underage girl back in 1979. Joining us now, great panel. From Boston, Adriana Cohen, the columnist with the Boston Herald. From Atlanta, Bruce Lavelle. He was the executive director of the National Diversity Coalition for Trump. And from Chicago, my old friend Jim Warren, chief media writer for the Poynter Institute. Jim, I already told everybody about the co-host from Hell Story, so that's already off the... That's already out there.
Thanks. If you've told them that, can you now assure them that our 5 combined children weren't listening to you opine about Louis C.K.?
Exactly. So, Jim, tell us about what. Let's start with this Roy Moore thing. We're not going to do Louis C.K. here probably, but Roy Moore, the Alabama race. What happens? I mean, a lot of people saying Mitch McConnell never should have gotten involved in this because it probably would have gone to someone like a Mo Brooks, who's a kind of just a run-of-the-mill conservative down there, very popular. But McConnell got involved, and the establishment came in, and they basically handed it to Roy Moore.
Yeah, the question is, you know, who defeats him? I see him in the United States Senate if this is all that we know. I mean, if 10 other women come out of the woodwork and claim things. But, you know, I think this is certainly a news story, but given the politics of that state, I think he's pretty much a lock as long as you know, he denies what happened. I mean, maybe a few years ago things would have changed. You know, it's interesting. Real quickly, I was listening to a lecture by a theologian tonight who mentioned in passing the dramatic changes since the two of us were debating on cable news 20 years ago, the Clinton and Broderick stuff that you alluded to earlier, but dramatic change in attitudes of Americans when it comes to the personal conduct of public officials, and how, this was a theologian saying that atheists in this country now place a higher priority on personal misconduct, personal behavior of politicians than do evangelicals.
Yeah.
But I don't think much is going to happen. I think he's going to be in the U.S. Senate.
Adriana, let's go to you. This was 39 years ago, a long time ago, right at the end of this very contentious Senate campaign. What's the sense that you get here? Is this something that will, as some Republicans are saying, going to hurt the Republican Party going forward? If he, as Jim's right, he wins, he's in the Senate, but that scandal will be used to kind of beat all these other Republicans over the head with, and their races in 2018.
You're right. I think it's all going to hinge upon whether or not more possible women come forward. If no more women come forward making these types of allegations, and it's his word against these his accusers, then maybe he can get by. But you know, if I looked at a recent polling, he's now tied Roy Moore with his Democrat opponent. They're both at 46%. So even if he, you know, is not removed, if he doesn't resign, he's still facing a tough challenge right now. So this is still very much an uphill battle.
Bruce, what's your sense here? The allegations are obviously sordid. I think we have to say you can't disprove a charge when it's made. You can't disprove it. If you're a man or a woman, something 38 years later, well, you did it. Well, you can't disprove it. It might have happened. It might not have happened. But you can't disprove it. You can't prove it. But the charge is out there, and it's political now. It's not legal. It's political. What's your sense?
Right. Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Well, you know, I've been thinking about that. I actually prayed about this before I came on your show because, you know, it's so unfortunate that these allegations came out, and I hope they're not true. And you saw what the president tweeted about that, you know, if they are, Judge Roy would do the right thing. But, you know, Laura, the interesting thing about this, about Judge Roy Moore, is everyone knows that he's a you know, devout Christian. He professes Christ as Lord and Savior, and so he knows that responsibility. If he's not being truthful or whatever, what his accountability is going to be, which is of course who he's going to have to answer to. But you know, I do say this, and I say this cautiously. This is very new. You know, that these charges or allegations came up. I hate to say the word charges, so I say stay tuned. But everyone, just pray for everyone that's involved in this. And you know, the great state of Alabama, the people of Alabama are going to come through. They're going to prevail, and they're going to do what's right when they vote December 12th. Yeah. And you know, the other thing too is I tell all the Republicans, you know, don't panic. You know, just pray for Judge Roy, just pray for the party, and just be diligent. You know, this is going to play itself off,
Democrats
like play itself out eventually. So I'm very optimistic.
Yeah. They never throw their people overboard. They stay with their guys during federal bribery trials. I mean, Chuck Schumer, you can't find him to say Menendez should step aside. He's in the middle of a trial, for a federal crime. He could go to jail for, I don't know, Jim, 10 years, something like that. I mean, that's a long time.
Laura, I got two words for you. Anthony Weiner. How do you explain that?
Yeah, exactly. No, I'd rather not think of that on a Friday night.
No, that's the Democrats throwing one of theirs overboard.
Yeah, well, yeah, but it took a little time there. Let's remind everybody what happened this week with Donna Brazile. These are some of the Brazile greatest hits of the week. Let's listen.
People who were making the decisions, even for the DNC, they didn't come and work with us. They told us to shut up and basically let them win the election. For those who are telling me to shut up, they told Hillary that a couple of months ago. You know what I tell them? Go to hell. I'm going to tell my story. It was a cult. I felt like it was a cult. You could not penetrate them. I used the word rigged. I did not like the cancer, okay? I call it cancer.
Adriana, I'll say they don't throw one of their own overboard unless it's Brazile throwing Clinton overboard or the Clintons now going after Donna. Very quickly, I want to get a quick take from each of you.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, look, the bombshell she dropped is just incredible. I mean, Donna Brazile is a prominent Democrat. She's, you know, a loyal foot soldier for the Democrat Party for decades. And for her to tell the American people, especially Democrats, that, you know, the Hillary Clinton campaign did indeed rig the primary against millions of Bernie Sanders supporters. I mean, this is outrageous. I mean, who needs Russia when Democrats are rigging their own elections? I'd like a Democrat to explain that.
Bruce, pithy.
Well, you know, I was thinking about this. You know, Laura, imagine if, God forbid, Hillary won the election. Where would Donna Brazile be now?
In the White House? Probably in the White House.
Would the book be out? With the, you know, it's hard to give any credibility to Donna because, you know, one thing about it, being a former chairman of a party here in Georgia, you know, meddling in with the primary is very dangerous for the party. It's very dangerous anywhere across the country when you have several candidates in the primary and the leadership starts to favor one when there's several in the primary is a detriment to the party itself. It actually destroys the party. So essentially that's what happened to the DNC. You know, they got in there and Clinton infiltrated it and got in bed with a lot of the folks in there, pushed Bernie to the side, pushed others to the side, when the party should vet itself through by the people,
Jim?
for the people, Democrat or Republican.
All right, let's get Jim last word. Jim, last words. We're out of time here.
Quickly,
Jim, does this do any lasting damage to the Democrat Party?
No, and it's part and parcel a little bit of a civil war, but this is mostly personal. Here's revenge is a dish best served cold. I don't think this is terribly ideological. This is someone pissed off because a bunch of millennial kids in Brooklyn weren't returning her calls, and because she was the head of the Democratic National Committee, and as you know as well as anybody, those committee structures have gone basically bye-bye. They're dated. Yeah. She was unhappy that she wasn't getting the respect she thought she deserved. And having said that, my 8-year-old has a 7:30 a.m. soccer game Saturday. I fully assume tomorrow that she'll be there hawking that book.
All right, guys, thanks so much. Have a great weekend. And up next, the president's critics claim he's been soft on trade during his Asia trip. Well, they should listen to what he had to say in Vietnam today. Back in a moment. President Trump is in Vietnam right now as part of his 12-day trip to Asia. There's been quite a bit of armchair criticism of the president's actions in China from pundits, comedians, and politicians. But how does that compare to what he actually said today? Let's watch.
Trump almost got on his knees, pulled out a ring, and proposed to the Chinese premier.
I spoke openly and directly with President Xi about China's unfair trade practices.
It'd be more accurate to say Trump has spent his visit to China with nose in butt.
We can no longer tolerate these chronic trade abuses, and we will not tolerate them.
And it's one thing to not blame them. It's another thing to praise them for ripping America off.
I expressed our strong desire to work with China to achieve a trading relationship that is conducted on a truly fair and equal basis.
You can almost hear the leadership of the Chinese government laughing from China to America.
The current trade imbalance is not acceptable. We are not going to let the United States be taken advantage of anymore. I am always going to put America first.
Yeah, it sounds like he's really kissing up to the Chinese there. And joining us now for reaction is Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer. He's a former Intel operative and Vice President of the London Center for Policy Research. I knew when he was there with Xi, with all the pageantry, he was doing the Trump strategy. Right. And tell us about what your impression was about how he handled himself there and all of the armchair critics.
Well, look, I liked his snark when he said, look, you took advantage of us. You better get over it and move on. I think it was a clear warning, and everybody completely here misinterpreted that. The other thing, Laura, they showed him a great deal of deference. I mean, he's the first leader that's been to the Forbidden City. That's just not done, and yet this is completely missed by the mainstream media. It's all about snark. The other thing that he said very clearly. Now, I don't know this for a fact, but I have a feeling that one of the things that he was probably suggested to threaten is their most favored nation trade status. That's huge. I mean, if you start threatening how they are able to get money from us, and he's saying we need to balance things, that is in their face but in a polite way. So I would argue he's been hard to the point of where now he has to open up the door and say it's time to talk.
An American president, at least not to my knowledge in my lifetime, has not ever gone to China and looked the Chinese leader in the eye and said, we're on to you. Right. We know what you're doing. Yeah. And I worked for President Reagan. I mean, obviously China wasn't a member of the WTO back then, but in Clinton, Bush, didn't happen. Right. Didn't happen. So I think that was actually so refreshing, and he kind of said, "Oh, I don't blame you." And he goes over to Vietnam. You don't think the Chinese were watching him right when he lands in Vietnam? And it was happened at 3:30 in the morning.
That's the other point I was going to make. The Reagan folks, I think, used to prepare. Bud McFarland's a friend of mine. They used to always spin President Reagan up to focus on the man, play the man. And I think that's what President Trump was doing here. He's playing the Chinese leadership. He's got to play them. He can't play the issues. So the other thing is now he goes to Vietnam and says, "Oh, by the way, we want to have a partnership with you. The other thing he's got in his pocket right now is the fact that Vietnam has a great economy, the South Koreans have a great economy, the Japanese have a great economy. We really don't need the trade with the Chinese to the level we do.
He wants to do one-on-one, bilateral trade agreements, get out of these mega deals where we always get the short end of the stick. And that's to me, that's doing trade the smart way.
And this is fulfilling his election promise. That by doing this, walking away from TTP, bringing over the Bernie folks, I know a lot of Bernie folks who voted for President Trump because that was unfair. And now I think he's trying to bring back the potential for trade, which will allow for American manufacturing to get off its butt and start doing more again. So I see this as a direct link to what he did a year ago to be elected, to start fulfilling these promises.
At the same time, he did announce a bunch of deals, $250 billion in deals with joint ventures, which is not, I mean, it sounds big, but the big thing is trade. Right. And I think so I think we have enough of the comedians doing foreign policy analysis. Tony, thank you so much. And straight ahead, doing more to support those who served as we prepare to honor Veterans Day. Stay with us. How can we and how can you support those who served in uniform on Veterans Day, and frankly on every day? That's the subject of our closing angle. Remember when General Kelly said this a few weeks back?
Most of you, as Americans, don't know them. Many of you don't know anyone who knows any one of them. But they are the very best this country produces.
He's right, of course. Yeah, I know veterans, and most are too proud to ask for help, or they're too independent and successful to need it. On Veterans Day, I think of my father, who died on his 88th birthday back in 2013. There he is. He served in the Navy in World War II at age 17. I think we serve veterans by supporting groups that actually get help to the vets who need it. There are a lot of great groups out there. The Wounded Warrior Project, Homes for Our Troops, and Liberty USO, just to name a few. There are a lot of them. And I think we serve veterans by remembering their stories and telling their stories to our children. We serve them by teaching our kids real history, the true history of our battles fought and lost, not a sanitized version that gels with the politically correct mores of the day. Our heroes aren't found at the Oscars or the Grammy Awards. They're found in ceremonies for Medal of Honor recipients, like the one last month for Vietnam vet Captain Gary Michael Rose.
After 4 days of constant engagement with the enemy, and after successfully destroying an enemy base camp, Mike's unit prepared to evacuate. When the helicopters arrived, Mike fought back the enemy as his fellow soldiers boarded the aircraft. He boarded the last chopper, limping up to the craft, while still warding off the enemy forces that were fast approaching.
Back in January 1989, Ronald Reagan reminded us of the importance of teaching history in his farewell address.
An informed patriotism is what we want. And are we doing a good enough job teaching our children what America is and what she represents in the long history of the world? Those of us who are over 35 or so years of age grew up in a different America. We were taught very directly what it means to be an American. And we absorbed almost in the air a love of country and an appreciation of its institutions. If you didn't get these things from your family, you got them from the neighborhood, from the father down the street who fought in Korea, or the family who lost someone at Anzio. Or you could get a sense of patriotism from school. And if all else failed, you could get a sense of patriotism from the popular culture. The movies celebrated democratic values and implicitly reinforced the idea that America was special. TV was like that too, through the mid-60s. We've got to teach history based not on what's in fashion, but what's important. Why the Pilgrims came here, who Jimmy Doolittle was, and what those 30 seconds over Tokyo meant. If we forget what we did, we won't know who we are. I'm warning of an eradication of the American memory that could result ultimately in an erosion of the American spirit. Let's start with some basics. More attention to American history and a greater emphasis on civic ritual.
I could watch that every day. It's just amazing. Those words are even more important today than they were almost 3 decades ago. Let's honor our veterans with respect and gratitude for what they sacrificed and support them for what they deserve and what they need. Happy Veterans Day to everyone out there who served. Up next, Shannon Bream.